Steve Stasiukonis, was one of the three founders of the company back in 1997. Early on, we wrote a port scanner. We sold the company to a private military company in 2000. Lasted about a year there. PMC was very much like a Blackwater. Wasn't a good fit. Bought the company back and kept it, really as a tool to do pen testing and security assessments, testing and stuff like that. Soon after that, became really involved in physically breaching buildings and getting into data centers and robbing banks and credit unions. And we became a real kind of a red team in terms of, that service as well. And since then, we've also now done things where folks get hit, an incident, and learning about an incident and seeing how your adversary works. And I will share with you that when you see somebody go through a really bad day, having been compromised, you get an education on how the threat actors are working, and that's been kind of what we've all been experiencing. Ken, I think you've seen a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
And
so that's definitely one of those things. The COVID thing is things have slowed down, but not cyber. Unfortunately, a lot of the bad actors have been opportunistic, and we've seen a lot of that stuff happening. So, and again, one of my favorite things to get out of you is just like these war stories, and particularly, I don't know why, but the James Bond like physical stuff. It just sounds so cool. So just to kick off here, like give me your favorite like physical story in the last 6 months.
In the last 6 months was a job we did. It's a little over 6 months, but it was a job getting past facial recognition and the stuff that you guys have on your iPhones and what you've seen that's been deployed. That stuff's rock solid. And company came to us and said, we have deployed facial recognitions in buildings and it's tied into our network. And we don't want you to just see if you could break it internally on the network. We want to get past it. And I will tell you, I did my homework. I learned everything about facial recognition. I felt like one of the Mythbusters, those guys in California. And finally, I called up a special effects company. I said, well, from what I've read, perhaps we have to build a head. He goes, so you're going to build a head that you're going to drag along surreptitiously in front of this foyer, and then they said you're going to control it to get past this system. They said it's not going to work. In fact, they said you can't afford the head. And we learned something about the country where we had to do this. It's in the Philippines, and the police in that country have it's a policy of shoot first, ask questions later. So security is an issue. And I will tell you what we figured out was leveraging intelligence to get past it was the way to go. And something that I thought was going to be a miserable, most difficult thing turned out to be one of the most engaging things. All it came down to was leveraging all the people that worked at the building, figuring out who the receptionist was, the security guards, figuring out who the building director was, the guy that actually ran the office, and then spoofed an email from him to the receptionist, communicate with the guards. And then we sent our guy in a brand new suit and a haircut. We forged a badge for him, so he walks in with a badge and knocked on the window, and they said, oh, Mr. Park is here. And they greeted him with open arms, gave him a place to sit down. And then we parked a field system on their network, looked in the inside of their network, figured out where the facial recognition system was, and then we added our guy. And then he could come and go as he wants. So right. Amazing, you look at the technology that's really rock solid, but the downfall is people, Ken. And it's unfortunate. I think we still see that.
If only we didn't have people. Well, that's it's a whole different problem. But I think that we get around this stuff that way all the time, and that's an amazing thing. We use you guys a lot for phishing, because I really appreciate that you guys spend the time to customize, think around it. It's not just automation, it's really that stuff. And I wonder, can you maybe share some of the secrets or some of the things you guys have, like when you're building a phishing attack and you're specifying it to a company? What are some of the things you do that generally work?
I think the one thing is the intelligence that goes in behind it, and mining intelligence or open source intelligence is the key, Ken. So like learning about the people at the company and determining commonality, if they all have a hot button, and there's enough content on LinkedIn and social media out there that you may determine that this company is all of a sudden, discussing, I don't know, some initiative, a Go Green initiative, lower the carbon footprint. And then we'll secure the domain. it'll look like their domain. It'll have all the same, language and verbiage. And when that gets launched, typically there's usually this very welcoming scenario that they see this thing that they've already been discussing, talking about. They're just expecting it now. And then you lead them off to the link and they go from there. And commonality is the really interesting thing that we find that leverages it.
Yeah. You guys have traditionally been very successful in that stuff, and I sometimes I would say this complaint, but because you also do the phishing campaigns for us, and it's too good, it's not fair, and I'm like, I don't think it's not fair. I think an attacker will do the same things that Secure is doing here. I mean, that's not outrageous. I mean, don't you agree? I mean, I think we're seeing those attacks.
Yeah, and the other thing that's happening too is we're doing the same thing like the bad guys do. It's not like we're like pioneers inventing this stuff. We're just kind of following their lead. And frankly, now what we do is we phish somebody, and if they don't respond, we call them. And we say, why didn't you click on the link? And they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. Let me click on the link for you now. So it's like, it's almost like it's almost like they think it's two-factor, it's multi-factor. Well, geez, I got the email, I thought it was spam. So the guy called me and he said, are you having a problem? So of course I initiated it. And I thought, wow, that's just unfortunate. But the threat actors across the globe, they're getting more articulate. Their English is very good. And trust me, the threat actors of today aren't like they were 10, 20 years ago. They were much different. We're dealing with
no more princes from Nigeria, right?
No, we're dealing with a lot really smart criminal now.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those funny things, because now, like, when I see people, you tell them when you're involved with cyber and you're at a cocktail party or whatever, you're talking to people and they're like, well, or some of these boards, some nonprofit boards and stuff like that, and they're like, what should we worry about? And I'm like, stop worrying specifically about firewalls. Like worry about your wire transfers. Like, people are smart about this stuff. They may send you a link, but a lot of times they'll just call you and get in the flow and either find out who your vendors are and get them to start sending wire transfers separately, or do things like that. And like you say, they're taking the time to do it on the phone because it works. It's certainly worth the payback to get into somebody's wire transfer structure.
Yeah, we just saw, this is how unfortunate this is. And all these threat actor groups, and in fact, I've got a dark market site that's up here now that I can't get into it just yet, but I'd love to show it to you. All these threat actors will always say, like, from our evil to dark side to CLOP, we'll never hit a nonprofit or whatever, blah, blah, blah. We just had a group of nuns get hit, the retirement fund, and they redirected $4.8 million. And I'm going to tell you, they were incredibly clever in how they did it. They injected themselves as the payee, and they instructed them to send the money, and it was so well orchestrated. And unfortunately, the nuns have lost that money, and once it's gone, after I think it was almost 72 hours before it was discovered that it was the wrong place, you're not getting that money back. And
no, once the wire transfers happen, that's over. That's one of those things. You just double check all your wire transfers. I say it all the time. Yeah, tells you what your confirmation. Yeah,
tells you what you're dealing with, though. You got a bad guy that'll steal from a nun. You've got a real sinister character. So it's really, that guy's going to hell for sure. So
they probably have different opinions about nuns in hell than we do, but yes, I can see where they're heading.
Yeah,
fantastic. So most of the people that tune into us are obviously our customers, and they're blue teamers probably in general. So and you're sort of a red teamer in general. So maybe the things you could do to kind of help is maybe talk about some of the tactics you use, kind of break down, like, when you're looking at a new target, what are some of the things you look for, and what things just generally work? Like, what things are like, oh, what's your low hanging fruit with a new target?
Well, obviously I think phishing is king. It seems like if we get phishing done, that's another area of low hanging fruit. The other thing too is recycle credentials. There's so many people out there that don't believe it. You preach it. I know, Ken, I know you guys talk about it and try to move people to not do that. And unfortunately, it's complacency. They continue to use the same password over and over again, and that gets out. And the tools are too easy to find it. All the dark web diggers that are down there. You go to a dark market, you buy all these batches. WeLeak Info now posts all that stuff, and it's just too easy to get. And threat actors,
I think passwordless is going to be huge. I can't tell you how many people And obviously, I don't say everyone, nearly everyone's on some sort of password rotation scheme. That's not all that a clever one either. And you say if you've got passwords on the internet and they're simply password 1, password 2, they're not that bad, but they're not much better in a lot of cases. I think we need to retire the whole concept of passwords. That's my dream.
I agree. And
get on.
Multi-factor. Some people don't believe in it, and it's so resistant, and I just don't get it. It's not expensive either, and it's always been around. It's been, for 20 years we've had RSA since it was Security Dynamics, and nobody wants to they're resistant to it at companies. It's very interesting to see that. So.
Yeah. So as we're investing in different technologies to be safe, right? We've got firewalls, we've got this, we've got different things we're doing. Like what things do you think are effective? What things do you think are just window dressing?
Real window dressing stuff. I mean,
I call it it's security theater, right? To use trying to remember the name of the fellow that used to call it that. But yeah, we do a lot of stuff. It's like security theater, right?
Yeah.
So what do you is there stuff that's new stuff that you think is particularly problematic for you guys, or do you think none of it doesn't make a difference, or it's not making a difference? Certainly, to your point with phishing, once you fish somebody, you're in.
Yeah, I know. I think all the endpoint detection stuff, like the tools that are out there by the next gen guys that are out there from CrowdStrike and Carbon Black and all those tools, I think they're really good. I think they're well put together and they're designed well. And I think that when they're out there, I think we make the assumption, and I see people make the assumption that that's the end all save all, and people still get hit. And I think that they tend not to look at things that require management or things that need to be addressed when something comes up, an event occurs, and they ignore it. And I still think that's the issue. I think all those tools are great, but somebody has to be watching them, and I think that that's where people fall down. They don't want to have somebody watch them or pay to have somebody watch them. And perhaps maybe it'll become different. Maybe more companies will become buying an alarm system for your office and having that keypad sit there is great and making sure you use it. I think that more people have to adopt that mentality on their network. I think they really have to have somebody looking at it.
That's one of the biggest motions for us is just managed services. I mean, we're selling a lot of article. We sell from customers between Fortune 10 banks and companies that might have one cyber person or even a part-time cyber person. And you have this conversation. I'm like, no one's going to have time to look at all these consoles. Like, you need event management. You need to outsource that to somebody. Someone needs to look at these things. And even if you do have that part, then frankly, no one's doing the remediation. Like, how many times do you come in and like, oh yeah, we knew that. We had a vulnerability management system, and to me, a frustrating part is customers do seem more apt, and again, we sell technology, so we're good there. But they seem more apt to make a buy of a product than to add a headcount or take on a managed service, because that's like a recurring cost. So they buy these products and there's no eyeballs to look at it, right? And to your point, they're just not going to resolve the problem by themselves.
Yeah. They always, and I just met with somebody and they were like, well, is there a silver bullet? And I was like, if there's a silver bullet, then I'm out of work. And I got to tell you, if it is, maybe it's going to save our country, but I haven't seen that silver bullet. Ken, have you seen a silver bullet yet? Because I mean, you guys sell a lot of cool technology. You're exposed to some things that I don't even have. But there's nothing out there yet.
No, there's no silver bullet, and again, it's just the size, scale, and capabilities of the attackers. Just unfortunately, in general, far outweigh the capabilities of our blue teamers and what we've got here. So we've got some good technologies, but there's just more persistence, more research, more structures to do that stuff. And they kind of get in. It kind of goes back to your physical thing. People talk to me like, should we get someone coming to do physical stuff? I'm like, yeah, we can get someone. Let me tell you, they're going to get in. Like when someone's on that level, for the most part, they're going to get in. And I think, some of these other things, it's a matter of stopping. I mean, I think a big motion right now is lateral movement, right? Like, they're going to get in. How do I stop lateral movement? Is that something you guys do? I mean, what are some of the things you see effective there, or like in terms of once I'm in, how do I get around? How does that work for you guys?
I think people that monitor for lateral movement are the ones that we get shot down and they put a bullet in us. So those are the guys that are actually actively doing things where they're watching things. Ken, the other scary part about lateral movement, I can't tell you how many pen tests and assessments we've done where there's no segmentation whatsoever. It's one big flat network, one big happy family. And explaining to somebody that, listen, you need to like really partition things off for these reasons. They're looking at that as an obstacle. And I was like, you talk, you explain it, they nod their heads and they say yes. And then you come back a couple of years later and it's the same big old flat network. I think segmentation is super important. Unfortunately, I wish more people took it seriously again. And I think that they need to monitor those segments. PCI, great example. All right. All your credit cards. I just was at some place. I hopped on their network. Where was I? I was at, I think I was at a hotel tied to a casino and I saw everything. And I was like, wow, I shouldn't see this from a guest network. I was shocked. So, here you have, somebody who's actually in the entertainment business, the casino business, and it's all exposed. And I was like, wow, it's 2021. We shouldn't see that.
Yeah. Well, and again, people are dying for operational efficiencies, and you see these customers make these decisions to keep everything flat and whatever. It's not the SolarWinds thing comes to mind, like, oh, I'm going to give everything access because that's what works for it. And, the operational guys kind of go do that stuff. And sometimes the ops guys are your biggest nightmare because the stuff that they're doing economically to be efficient are things that are going to become real problems for you on the cyber side.
Yeah. So I got a question for you, Ken. With the guys like Arctic Wolf and the managed service providers, we see offenders. A lot of them are the administrators, the guys that are actually running. And, for example, all of a sudden they're opening up RDP on the outside, remote desktop protocol. And they're like, well, I'm just going to open it up for a couple hours, move some stuff in and out. And then all of a sudden something else happens and that's left open for 4 days. Do the guys that actually do those managed services, will they see that? Will they say, oh, wait a minute, what's going on here? Is there visibility into that?
We have to make sure they're seeing the right logs, right? The question is, what's the data? What are you giving them? And are they seeing that kind of stuff? So you need to have some sort of continuous vulnerability scan, some sort of structures for that. Sometimes you're feeding them rule-based changes. There are things to manage the rule-based, but I think you have to work very carefully with your provider, whether it's Arctic Wolf for anybody, to make sure that the right events are the right things are being monitored in terms of configuration controls on your fire. Like in that case, right, configuration controls around the firewall. How's that being monitored, and how does that become an event, and which eyeball looks at it? So I think, that's something we have to work with as a provider to talk to them about, because your service provider, whether it's Arctic Wolf or whoever, they're going to basically look at the events you give them, right, and decide which ones are incidents, decide which ones are escalations. You've got to give them quality events and make sure those kind of configurations are looked for. But frankly, one of the things that even foundationally that you're pointing out here is you need to kind of take an audit mentality, take a compliance mentality towards your own IT people. I think we all trust our IT people. I trust my IT people. I like my IT people. I have that stuff, but you can't manage by strongly worded memo with your IT people, just like you don't with your users, right? You can't issue a memo like don't open RDP. You need to have some sort of external validation about these configurations, some sort of check, some sort of structure. So I think it's a process, but I think that's the understanding. This is a process problem, not a technology problem. Right? Yeah. How do I do change control, and how does that all work? I mean, does that resonate with you? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting though, because it's funny. Like, some of the biggest offenders I see, administrators, and then the C-suite, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Doesn't apply to them. Oh no.
Yeah.
I don't do that.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a customer the other day about DLP, and it's obviously a critical control, but foundationally, almost very rarely catches, say, a bad actor per se. What you're catching is ridiculous business processes. They kind of catch us stupid, to use the quote this customer gave me. All day long, I just catch stupid. So I just see somebody who's trying to do the right thing by the company in their mind by sending a spreadsheet full of credit cards or social security numbers to provider to just get something done, and it turns into a bad process. But I think that's part of our job, to stop those processes. And to your point, stopping that RDP in the first place, checking that out, making sure maybe there was a reason for it, but it's just going to turn into a long-term liability, right? Those changes. And you know, you don't want to be the house of no, but you need to be the house of sanity. So sometimes you gotta look at that stuff.
This is true.
But yeah, totally crazy, man. Awesome. So what else? I like the conversation about you were saying about microsegmentation, segmentation, that stuff, and I think we'd see more. But I usually get concerned though about, like, to me, like, Active Directory is just such a big problem. And I always have this fight with people that, like, I was like, well, I like microsegmentation, but you know what I love is privileged access control. Like I worry about that stuff more. I mean, do you think that's a similar? I mean, do you see Microsoft as? I had someone get on this conversation a few months ago and basically tell me that everyone needs to get off Microsoft AD right now because it's terrible. I'm like, I don't know where they would go. Do you see AD as the biggest problem or a big problem?
I see it as a big problem, but it's not because the product is a problem. It's because the people running it are the problem. We just did a project, and it's one of those things. It's like, well, geez, I thought they got like 98 or 100 people here, and it was like 500 people in Active Directory, and half of them were administrators. It was like, well, wait a minute, what's going on here? And you know what? It was a result of just not good housekeeping, and that's not, for that guy to say that. I don't think that's fair against Microsoft, because it's a good product. I mean, well, you're right. What are you going to go back and use LDAP? Is that
right?
Tell me, what are you going to do? So, like,
right.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean,
no, I think local admin's a problem. I think it kind of points out a problem of, if I'm letting users have local admin, it makes a lot of my life easier, and they can auto update and do this and that, whatever. But fundamentally, that's just a huge security problem, and it needs to be fixed. And it's a little bit of a hassle for the IT guys to work around it. But with local admin open, once you fish the station, you just have too much motion inside of AD. And once you own the AD, you own probably the backups, all that stuff. Is that something you guys do? Do you like try to see if you can get to the backups in some of your customers and see what?
Oh God. Oh yeah. I mean, we don't want to mess with them. We don't want to like all of a sudden do something a real threat actor would do. But if we get access, if they park backups on the same domain and we get domain admin, we have the keys to the kingdom are there, and then it's all visible to us. And that's like the red flag in the report. That's like that's got to stop. In fact, I think we stop at that point and say, listen, you might want to like lock that down so that in the event something does happen, I don't want to have it happen on my watch. I don't want to be involved in you testing your network where somebody goes through that. There's plenty of places that still do that. And once again, there's enough services out there. There's enough discussion and really education about locking that stuff down. It's unfortunate. It really is.
Yeah. No, it goes back to the other conversation about the sort of controls about cyber versus IT. And I think we've been having a lot of conversations with CISOs about ransomware, obviously, because that's a thing. And resiliency is really critical, right? Like, it's not so much a question of the stuff, but how do I get back? Which means like the backups are critical. And so like how many CISOs are really in charge of or aware of the backups and the security around the backups? Like, is that their problem or is that IT's problem? And it probably needs to be cyber's problem more. Like where are the backups and how are they safe?
Ken, I got to agree. And the other thing too is I think people need to test and do like purple team scenarios more, right down to like, let's actually do a recovery from a backup. Let's take something that's been archived and let's deploy it and let's see if we can go live. And what's that delta of time that we're going to lose? How many people have you seen getting hit and all of a sudden it's like, yeah, we got backups. I don't think we've ever restored or tried to restore before. And it was like, boy, I guess we're going to be all learning about this right now, aren't we?
Yeah, so, and just to your point, the time frames, like once they really get down to like how long it would take to restore a significant part of their infrastructure, I think people come to the realization that they're really not ready. I was talking to a customer the other day. Laptops. They've got tens of thousands of laptops, and they're talking about like, well, what should we do? How should we back them up? I'm like, even if you backed up the 10,000 laptops, how on earth would you restore them all? Like, how would you think the users are going to come and like do their own rebuilds and go to their own restore? So I mean, you need a program for that that's a little more agile, right, in terms of what your process is going to be in terms of that stuff. And God forbid you have that bad day, which, as we know, that unfortunately happens too often. What's sort of your break glass scenario for that? So we've been helping customers with sort of their virtual desktop structures and how they get to virtual desktops and that kind of situation. But yeah, the realities of the backup and restore, it's important to surface those.
I heard, and I didn't get the job, and I heard about it through another entity, a very reliable source, but a very large labor union, a very large one, got hit with ransomware, and their only way of actually recovering was to burn everything down and start over, and that was from a nationwide perspective. And I thought, holy cow, what would that cost?
Yeah.
And I think you're in probably the hundreds of millions of dollars at that point.
Right.
You're just starting over everything. So I frightening. So
crazy stuff, man.
Yeah.
So one of my questions I always ask is, because you're a cool guy and you're in cyber, like whatever. Like what do people need right now? Like if you and I were to start a company tomorrow making a product, what product would we make? What does the industry need? And you talked about the silver bullet, and there's no silver bullet, but like,
I know.
what does the industry need?
Well, I don't know. This is what I see as a need from my perspective, because once again, dealing with threat actors and seeing how they work and what they do, but also how they hide. And the one thing I would love to do is be able to track them better, because right now, what they do, and I don't know if the folks that are listening to this understand how a bulletproof hosted site works, but these guys in other countries, and by the way, there's 71 countries across the globe that have no extradition to the US. They don't care. So what they have is you could go to FlowSpec in Russia, Seychelles has got a bunch of them out there. They've got hosting facilities for bad guys, and bad guys can go spin up a box, and their websites are incredibly articulate. They're well put together. They're marketed like they're a regular, like, institutional site that we would have in our country. But they have a feature, and the feature is called, did you ever hear of this? It's called Fast Flux. So what Fast Flux does, this is frightening. What it does is it takes their IP address in that bulletproof hosted country. It could be in Syria, could be in Belarus, and then it tricks DNS. So 1 second the guy's in Belarus, the next second he's in Hawaii, the next second he's in China, then he's in Switzerland. So you got no idea how to track a bad guy. His command and control is all over the place. If we could figure out how to re-trick Fast Flux into giving the geolocation of the IP, and then kicking the guy's door in, and then putting a beating on him, I think that might be our best bet. But I just, I see that offered all the time now on the dark websites that are offering those services. I gotta wonder if that's why we can't catch them. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a part of this that I always say, like, as this gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and I think it becomes more and more impossible to think that we have the tools to stop this large industry with all of these safe havens and all the rest of this stuff. And it's one of the analogies is like, well, listen, I'm pretty sure that if roving bands of militants were coming down from Canada and stealing stuff from the US and running back to Canada, the government wouldn't say, guys, everyone who lives by the border should buy a gun and maybe get a second gun and get a dog. That wouldn't be our government's response to roving bands of bandits crossing the border from Canada. So, at some point, it's almost like when, maybe we need SEAL Team 6 to go into Syria and take these servers out, take these functions out. And some of these things just, these hosting sites need to not exist. So I'm not politically declaring my candidacy here or anything, but it does seem at some point that there's going to have to be a larger government response to some of this stuff.
Even if we could just figure out where it's located from the bulletproof hosting perspective, and then kind of block it effectively, so that at least we could protect ourselves. I mean, I'd be totally fine with that. But when you see how they move through and how they leverage that technology, it's incredibly, it's brilliant what they've done. Yeah. I mean, it makes it so hard to track them. Perhaps our government has something out there. I don't know. That's above our pay grade. So we don't get that. So
yeah. With all the red team stuff you guys are doing, and I know there's a lot of my customers who have red teams are doing a lot more with automation, like automated attack sets and automated toolkits. Do you see value in that motion? I know you guys are kind of bespoke in a lot of the stuff you do. I mean, do you think these automated red team toolkits are helpful?
I think they are. I mean, there's a purpose for them, and they're obviously being sold, and they're successful at selling them. So I think they're good. It's interesting though too. I think a lot of the bad guys are leveraging them as well. So we're finding out that, the company that bought Core Impact, it's Help Systems, I think, and now they bought Cobalt Strike. Cobalt Strike's very automated. It's very well. It's written by a guy named Raphael Mudge. Raphael's a very smart guy, and there's two Mudges. This guy's a different Mudge, but the bad guys are using those tools too. So if they're using them from an automated perspective, once again for testing, I think that we need to start looking at the same thing that they're using as well. But tells you about the efficiencies of what they got going on.
Yeah, I think it's useful from a customer perspective, because I think one of the challenges to me of the red team concept is that as a red team, you're trying to find a way in and just illustrate it and bring it to light, maybe have it fixed. But fundamentally, your job is to find a way in. Your job is to find all the ways in, right? And so your blue teamers can really fix all the ways. And I think that there's just so many things to do in any sizable organization that you need some automation to look for all of the ways. So you can give them the best report you can give them.
Ken, and the other thing too, and we're coming up with this mindset here, is when you hear about how Klopp and R-Evil and Darkside or Dark Matter or whatever their names are now, Adlin, all these guys, they recruit and they're franchising threat actors and they're bringing them in. And they're doing it in a way, when you read and see their forums, and what they're saying is looking for good Active Directory guy, looking for a guy who knows how to do encryption really well. We're kind of realizing that perhaps we need to follow that same mentality. You get a pen tester that's really good at getting through the perimeter and doing something nefarious, let's say even a great fisher, and then a guy that's going to be able to go inside there and just, go through AD like a rabid raccoon looking for a sandwich, and then passing that on, that credential on to another guy that moved laterally. And I think that's leveraging automation is probably a key element, but also leveraging, the efficiencies of people that are really good at their job doing things, because I think that's what the bad guys are doing.
Right, it's a team effort for sure.
Yeah,
that's smart. How are you doing finding people? I know we're having a lot of work just doing placements because all of our customers are looking for people, but it seems like the labor market has just been very tough. It's always been tough in cyber, particularly tough now. I mean, are you guys still hiring? Where are you finding people? Because a lot of my customers ask me, where do we get good people?
So it's really hard. You're right. It's incredibly difficult, and it's like finding a unicorn. But the one thing we seek is somebody with an OSCP, offensive security certified professional, OSCP, because it's practical. They're hands-on guys. And you know what? Believe it or not, I'm finding them through forums. I'm finding them through user groups, guys that are trying to go through the next OSCP test. That's what we're doing. I got a young man here. He was an RN, hated nursing, passes his OSCP. That he's a pipe hitting hard hacker. He's a really good pen tester. Yeah, he said, he goes, nursing was a very noble, very honorable thing. He goes, but this is way more interesting. This is what gets him up in the morning. Guy with passion is what I want. Hard,
right.
It is hard. There's a giant void in the industry.
Yeah, I always talk to people about what gear they have at home, what they're doing, what their lab looks like. If you haven't moved this into your personal hobby space also, and you don't have a lab and aren't doing, you're just you're carrying a cert and you're not really doing it. You're not living it. No. So I think when I have that conversation, I see that happen. But it's certainly tough to find people out there right now. And like I said, our recruiters are super busy. I can't see. I don't know if we're getting questions. I'm not seeing them on my screen. Is there? Ali would have email them to me or something. I do want to make sure that we get any questions brought up. So what do you think's next for you guys? What are your plans at Secure? Are you guys growing? Are you guys what's your plan over there?
We're growing. We're obviously looking at different vectors. I will tell you, Ken, the area of concern that I have and that we're seeing is now IoT. And I know you and I have done some IoT projects together. And it's gaining steam. And there's so many things connected to the internet that I think people are losing sight that it's not the sensor, it's not the thing collecting the analog data. It's going from that web gateway into that application where all that analog data is now converted to digital content and how it's being used. And that vector, that scares me, because we're seeing these threat actors hit water systems across our country and other areas of infrastructure. I got to tell you, I think we've lost sight to how much stuff is connected. And
absolutely, and I definitely see that as a segmentation issue, because I think a lot of people have this IoT stuff, they're not even aware of it in their corporate networks, and we do a lot of the hospitals are just because they're not even controlling the procurement of it. They don't. IT guys aren't even familiar, because all the IoT stuff is mostly medical gear being brought in by the doctors being run. So there's not even a good inventory of it, frankly, right, of what they've got and whatever. So it's all the networks, it's all open, it's making all the home calls, and there's not really a control for it for most of those guys. So it's a scary space.
Ken, you're right. And the other thing too is all the applications that are being developed for IoT, a lot of that stuff's like homegrown. A lot of it's like being developed on the cuff or on the fly. HVAC systems, hospitals. I'm thinking, some of that stuff, they must be banging that stuff out fast and furious in terms of how it works and the updates for them, or even if they are getting updated. I don't even know. But that's a concern.
Yeah, a lot of software development companies don't have good cyber practices or thoughts about it, and frankly, a lot of them are also even cyber companies, because they're really software companies first, and then the developers are just developers. Like, you put your controls around it. So it's certainly an area where we're going to see more surprises.
It's going to hit everybody, Ken. It's not just going to be the commercial businesses, even the residences, because like I'm building a house. I told you about that. I got to bring a water tank in. I got horrible well water, so I got to buy a tank. There's a sensor that when we get low on water, it tells the guy to ship more water in. There's a sensor that goes on propane tank. You're low on propane, get propane. I live in upstate New York. It's brutally cold, and then I got to worry about now having the simple resources, available to keep this house running, and having sensors like that are a concern.
Yeah, no, it's definitely spreading all over. All right, so I think we're doing well here. I got most of my questions answered. Do you have any? Give me one more war story. Give me one more cool hack or cool thing you guys found out, because I know you're always full of them.
Coolest job we ever did, shipping a man in a box, without question. So company was in California and on the East Coast as well. They were threatened by Anonymous, and they were concerned that they were going to be the next victim, because they were outed as a result of another company that got breached, and they were listed and they were notified. So this company was very clandestine, tied to the government, and they said, listen, you got a job to do, and this is going to be it. You got to find the buildings. We're not going to tell you where they are. They're hiding in plain sight. The second thing is you got to find the buildings, but also get inside the buildings. And then once you're inside the buildings, you got to connect into the network. And I was like, wow, this is going to be rather difficult, because I don't even know where to go. I got a city, that's about all I'm looking at. So after 2 to 3 weeks in each city, we had a good understanding of perhaps where we could go look. And then we did figure it out. We hired a private investigator, went to every bar, restaurant, gym, fitness center, finally got some intelligence in the area. And then we realized how difficult the buildings were to get into, because we would count the cameras, and then we started looking at the cameras, and then we started looking at the people around it. And they actually had plainclothes guards that were walking the buildings, and they were unsuspecting. I mean, they looked like they were civilians. And we realized, okay, this is going to be super hard now. But there was one flaw they had. And the one flaw that they had was they were receiving containers from the Middle East that were the size of pretty much about a 6 to 7 foot long desk and about 4 feet wide. And they're called SKB crates. And that crate would come in, or 2 crates would come in, FedEx Custom Critical every day. So we realized that we had to buy a crate, and I bought a crate. I had a machine shop put a locking mechanism on the inside. I had a digital periscope that came out of the top little emblem that was a recessed piece of aluminum, put wheels on it. And then we bought and sat down with our FedEx guy, and we bought him a coffee. And we said, listen, Jason, we need to become FedEx guys. How do we get uniforms? And he said, I hate these people I work for. I'll get you all the uniforms and everything you need. And I said, we need the computer. He goes, I can't get you that, but I know where to get one. So we bought a computer. And then what we actually did is we rolled in and we put a guy, we had life support in the box. We had an oxygen tank, and he had everything he needed to maintain his himself. And there was a day we realized the day we'd strike, we actually rolled up, we wrapped a van in FedEx Custom Critical vinyl. We had uniforms and badges. We had a man in the box, and we shipped them in. And he got past security, and then he just waited, and it was literally like Ocean's 11. And he popped out. He gets out of the building. He's wearing the same clothes they wear, because we saw we're wearing track jackets with their logo on them. So we forged those. then he plugs into their network, and now we've walked past their firewall. So probably one of the most nerve-wracking jobs, literally human malware.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a great story. All right, so if I haven't gotten any questions, I haven't heard that stuff. I think this has been a great session, Steve, and I want to thank you for coming on with us, and I'm sure we'll have you on again soon. Any last thoughts for everybody? Things people.
All I can say is probably, like we talked about, change your password to a passphrase and use two-factor authentication. And segment your network.
Good advice every day. All right, Steve, thanks. Allie, thanks for everybody for joining. And I'm hopefully talk to you all soon. Thank you.
All right, take care. Thank you, Ken. Bye.